George Orwell, in his first novel, Burmese Days, speaking eponymously, actually, because he was a colonial official in Burma, through a colonial official, Jim Florey, is talking to a girl, chatting up a girl, talking about imperialism, which you might think a kind of strange chat-up line. And the girl asks, "What's imperialism?" And Jim Florey replies, "Imperialism is going to other people's countries and stealing their things," which is just about the best definition of imperialism that I've ever read, and it's only in one line. Our next speaker knows more than anyone else on this panel what imperialism is, because Britain went to Ireland centuries ago and stole their things, and deported and incarcerated and murdered those who stood up against them. Tommy McKearney has all his life stood up against them and paid the price. A political prisoner, a hunger striker. Please welcome, from the occupied 6 counties in the north of Ireland, Tommy McKearney.
Thank you, George. And I'm going to put Britain in the frame, although we've heard so much about the United States, and rightly so, and undoubtedly the most powerful imperial power on the globe. But let's not forget the crucial part that Britain is playing in this despicable attempt to crush the spirit and physical body of Julian Assange, and by doing so to prevent the exposure of the criminal behaviour of imperialism across the globe. Last night we heard Vivienne Westwood speak of the need by the powers that be to define the narrative, and this is something that the British do quite well. They find it imperative that they do so because, as previous speakers have very eloquently outlined and done so with great enlightening detail, that there is no case against Julian Assange, that he has no case to answer, that he is not culpable of any crime. So therefore, they find it imperative and necessary to create something that is not there. The reason, and this is something that should give us some cause for optimism, is because if he was not to be slandered and scandalised, if the truth were to be known, that in this country, as in so many other countries, the majority of people, if in possession of the facts, the real facts, will render an honest, honourable verdict. What we're talking about here is actually a scurrilous, scandalous attempt to criminalise Julian Assange in order to facilitate his extradition to the United States of America, where presumably the intention is to detain him indefinitely, to crush him, to stop the movement that he has worked so hard for, and to send a threatening, chilling message to others who might expose the truth and the evils of imperialism. Now, the thing about this is that this is not a new technique or tactic. It's something that the British state, the deep state, is expert at because it has performed it for a long, long time. The arts of dissembling are well practiced. It's not for nothing that we're known, or that the British ruling class has earned itself the title of perfidious Albion. Just think of some of the things that have happened, not today or yesterday. India's first war of independence, still referred to in British textbooks as the Indian Mutiny. The Kenya Land and Freedom Army, still referred to in Britain as the Mau Mau Rebellion. The Malayan National Liberation Army, described in Britain and by the British forces at the time, communist terrorists, CTs, or something we're familiar with, bandits. But let's bring it even closer to home. As George Galloway has mentioned, Ireland has often, and rightly so, been described as England's oldest, and my dearest wish that it will be our last colony. By the mid-1970s, there had been a struggle for the establishment of an Irish independent and sovereign republic, a struggle that had been pursued intermittently for probably over 2 centuries. It would appear quite obvious, therefore, that political conflict in Ireland had its roots in political issues. And whatever opinion people may have of that conflict, it could not certainly be described as a run-of-the-mill or conventional criminal enterprise. Nevertheless, and in spite of that, in spite of our proximity here in Britain to Ireland, in spite of the fact that it's probably the largest migrant population on this island, in spite of our long history of knowing each other, that Britain, in 1975, having failed to provide and to persuade the Provisional IRA to cease its armed campaign, the government of the time in London decided to rewrite at the very least 2 centuries of Irish history and to redefine the problem in Northern Ireland as one of base and basic criminality. To illustrate their point, the British government decided to declassify captured IRA prisoners, no longer treating them as political prisoners, but instead to treat them as common criminals, with all that entailed in terms of prison, most notably forcing Republican prisoners to wear conspicuous prison garb and to carry out menial prison work. This culminated in hunger strike, which led to the death of 10 Republican prisoners. Actually, and strangely, and maybe not so strange actually when you think of it, that seminal event in Irish history, recent Irish history, has been ignored by the BBC in its major 5-part series, Thatcher, A Very British Revolution. Indeed, an indictment on the British Broadcasting Corporation. At that stage, however, at stake for the British is what is known, as I've said to you, in public relations circles as defining a narrative, in order to allow the British to implement their own self-serving political agenda. Because the British state and the British Empire was so well known around the world, the largest landmass under empire that the world has known. There was understandably a perception around the world that what was happening at that time in the northern part of Ireland was not a criminal conspiracy, it was not civil disturbance, it was rightly described as an insurrection against colonial occupation. But to counter that perception, for to facilitate its agenda, the British government had decided upon a policy of criminalisation. There is question marks possibly created about Britain's intentions. But let me just point something out here. In 1949, the southern part of Ireland left the Commonwealth and declared itself a republic, changing the relationship between Southern Ireland, or the Republic of Ireland as it is known today, and Britain, removing the last tangible connection of dominion status. As a result of this, the British government drew up an act, it's known as the Ireland Act of 1949, and in it a working party reported to facilitate the drawing up of the legislation for that act. And in that report it said, "It has become a matter of first-class strategic importance that the north of Ireland should continue to form part of His Majesty's dominions." And the report continued that it indeed seemed likely that Britain would never be able to agree to Northern Irish secession, even if the people of Northern Ireland desired it. Clearly an indication that British position and presence in the northern part of Ireland was not, as the narrative then being described, to keep the warring tribes apart. Hence the need to redefine the narrative, and on this occasion via what would be known as criminalisation. By this, I am pointing to the fact that when we're looking at what's happening today to Julian Assange, the spurious attempt to distract, to deflect from what is actually happening, by defining the narrative of Julian Assange as a sex criminal, giving rise to, were it to be the case, something that reasonable people would say has to be condemned. Reasonable people could see no reason for not facing and forcing an offender of that nature to face justice. Moreover, by using that particular offence, that particularly nasty offence, for which, if it were to be true, there is really no justification. It puts him beyond the pale of normal, reasonable behaviour. Studied practice. A few other points I'd like to make in terms of the process of criminalisation, because there are certain other strategic advantages from the state's point of view. By entering this charge and by criminalising Julian Assange, or attempting to do so, I should have said, there is, from the point of view of the authorities, an almost a win-win-win situation. Because not only will so many decide that this is a case not to be fought, those so-called people, civil libertarians, Amnesty International, those agencies and individuals who under other circumstances might indeed feel compelled to support someone who has exposed injustice. But what it also does, and this is not an argument against what we're doing here tonight, but when you think about it, the win-win for the state is this, that those of you committed to justice, committed to anti-imperialism, tonight we are fighting for Julian Assange. Correctly so, properly so, rightly so, and it is essential that we do so. But keep in mind that this, to an extent, is deflecting attention from other issues, that we are tied up, our energies are being expended in fighting this rearguard action on behalf of Julian Assange. These are calculations that the empire, whether it's the British Empire or the United States Empire, these are people who have long considered, who have long experience, who know the game they're playing, because we're not dealing with amateurs in this business of empire and manipulation. Now, I'm going to say something here that I hope, I trust, and I don't pray any longer, but I hope that I will be proven wrong on this. But those people who, for sometimes different reasons, are in a position to expose the crimes and sins of the powerful in Britain have very often met with a tragic fate. You may not be familiar with the name of Richard Piggott, and I'm sure, why would you? He died in 1889. Richard Piggott sold a letter ostensibly proving that Charles Stewart Parnell had involved himself in the assassination of 2 high-ranking British officials in Ireland. He sold the letter to the London Times for £5,000, in today's money about £5 million. At his trial it was found and proven with a spectacular, skillful piece of legal defence that the letter was a forgery. The fact is, and the fact was raised, why would the Times have paid such a vast sum of money for that letter without having assurances? And where did the assurances come from? And who provided the backing to introduce this cheap scoundrel to the London Times? Piggott escaped from court, fled to Spain, but was tracked down, and Scotland Yard went to bring him back to London. Richard Piggott asked, could he shave? And they said, of course you can. And unfortunately there was a shot discharged and he killed himself. So they say. Brings me then to 1963, when another potential person who could disclose spurious information on the British state unfortunately also took his life, a guy called Stephen Ward in the infamous Perfumio scandal. Take it forward another few years to 2003, and another person, David Kelly, who could in turn have done significant damage to the establishment, again tragically took his own life. So let's just be careful, because we do know that Julian Assange in prison is under incredible mental stress and strain. We've got to be very, very careful that these people do not press that man into an action similar to that. Because the British prison system is not a humane system. He will be held in isolation, and he will be subjected to the very sophisticated torture that exists within the British prison system. Something I often quote is that under prison regulations in Britain, if the prison wishes to punish someone, that person has to be presented before the prison doctor to guarantee that he or she is fit for punishment. Most spectacularly, this used to happen in the old days when the cat of nine tails was used, or credited or not, if someone was to be executed. The doctor had to certify that the person was fit for execution. This is the system now. Thankfully, we don't have capital punishment in Britain any longer. But what will happen, let me tell you, for the period he is here even, that he will be either held in solitary confinement or he'll be left with other prisoners who are hostile to the outlook of Julian Assange. And you can take your pick, whether it will be the EDL or whether it will be other elements such as that, who can be easily worked upon to make his time incredibly difficult. So let's be very, very wary and watchful of this man's mental health and his condition. Because, and I'm ending on this here, we talked last night about the absolute imperative to have the truth told. And where the state will not be transparent, will not let the public know, democracy is under threat. Only the people can endorse and authorise the actions of the state. If that doesn't happen, the state is then in the control of the deep state. This is totalitarianism at its worst. We cannot depend on the press. In theory, we want and demand and insist upon a free press, but we can't depend upon a free press. I'm just going to say something here about a quote I read today. It was from a piece of writing well over a century ago. A man visiting London, who visited London one time, and to his credit, when most on the left at the time were disparaging of our attempts in 1916 to break free from the empire, he was almost alone on the left in saying, yes, you can't wait for a perfect social revolution. But he said of the press, freedom of the press in bourgeois society means freedom for the rich, systematically, unremittingly, daily, in millions of copies, to deceive, corrupt and fool the exploited and oppressed mass of the people and the poor. That was V.A. Lenin. And that has not changed. There are journalists of integrity, there are journalists of enormous courage, but without the guarantee that those that accumulate and access the information, that are willing to disclose it as Julian Assange done, the rest of the press will remain in the pocket of the powerful. So, as I have said, criminalisation is not an accident. It is a tool of the oppressor, and in this case it's being used to oppress freedom of speech. It's being used to oppress the person who has delivered the truth, who has delivered the democratic element of society to us. And we must at all costs fight with everything we have to ensure that this man is not to spend the rest of his life in the obscenity of a US prison. So thank you all.